The year was 1966. Amidst the chaos of post-independence Nigeria, love blossomed in an unexpected corner of the University of Ibadan. Obasi, a vibrant Igbo student studying engineering, met Ese, a spirited Ijaw woman pursuing medicine. Their connection was instant, a meeting of minds as much as hearts. They dreamed of a united Nigeria, where tribal lines blurred under the banner of shared prosperity. Yet, whispers of unrest grew louder. Political tensions simmered, and by 1967 the fragile peace shattered with the outbreak of the Nigerian Civil War. Obasi, swept up in the wave of Igbo nationalism, was conscripted into the Biafran army. Ese, back home in the Niger Delta, found herself missing her Igbo lover. Letters between them grew sporadic, each one a lifeline but fraught with danger. The news hit Obasi like a thunderclap. Ace's village had been raided, her family scattered. The love of his life was in danger. The thought of her enduring the horrors of war spurred him into action. He clenched his fists. "I must locate Ese," he vowed, his voice low but resolute. Escape would not be easy. As a Biafran soldier, slipping past his comrades and evading the Nigerian forces was akin to courting death. Obasi planned meticulously. He waited for the chaos of an imminent battle, knowing that the confusion would provide him with a slim window to flee. When the day came, Obasi fought fiercely, not just for survival but for freedom. Amid the cacophony of gunfire and the cries of the wounded, he slipped away, sprinting toward the dense forest beyond the battlefield. He tore off his uniform, exposing the rough civilian clothes he had hidden beneath. Blood and grime masked his face, rendering him unrecognizable as a soldier. He found a shallow stream and waded into it, erasing his tracks. Emerging hours later, he encountered a small farmstead. Its owner, a widowed woman, eyed him suspiciously but softened when he offered his remaining provisions. She handed him a tattered shirt and a hastily drawn map of the area. "Follow the river," she whispered. "It leads south, but beware of patrols and bandits." Obasi's journey south was grueling. He traveled by night, guided by the faint glow of the stars and the map clutched in his hand. By day, he hid in the underbrush or sheltered in abandoned huts. Hunger gnawed at him, and the pangs of thirst were relentless. One night, as he navigated a swamp, the stillness was shattered by the sound of voices. A group of enemy soldiers was patrolling nearby. Obasi flattened himself against the muddy ground, barely breathing as their lanterns flickered through the darkness. Mosquitoes buzzed mercilessly, but he did not move. When the soldiers passed, he continued, slipping deeper into the swamp's murky waters to mask his scent. Hours later, he stumbled upon a village devastated by war. The air was thick with smoke, and the ground was littered with the remnants of lives torn apart. In the ruins, Obasi met a man who claimed to be a trader but was clearly a smuggler. The man eyed him warily. "You don't look like you belong here," he said, his tone sharp. "I'm just a man trying to find his family," Obasi replied, his voice steady. The smuggler smirked. "Family, huh? That'll cost you." Obasi offered the only thing of value he had left, a handmade leather belt Ese had given him. The smuggler examined it, then nodded. "There's a boat leaving for the Delta in 2 days. If you're lucky, it'll get you close." The boat ride was far from safe. The vessel was small and overcrowded, creaking under the weight of its passengers. As they drifted downriver, they were attacked by river pirates. Chaos erupted as the smugglers tried to fend off the attackers. Obasi leaped into action, using a makeshift spear to defend the boat. In the fray, the necklace Ese had given him slipped from his pocket and into the water. He froze momentarily, watching the last tangible connection to her disappear beneath the waves. Fueled by desperation, he fought harder, his resolve unshaken. When the pirates were finally driven off, the smuggler grinned at him. "You've got a fighter's heart. Maybe you'll find what you're looking for after all." The boat dropped him off near a remote fishing village, still miles from Ese's last known location. From there, Obasi traveled on foot, his energy waning but his determination growing. He bribed a fisherman with his last possession, a brass ring, to ferry him across a dangerous stretch of river. Finally, after weeks of evasion, hunger, and exhaustion, he reached Ese's village. It was eerily quiet, the air thick with the stench of burnt wood and despair. He found her family's hut in ruins, but a neighbor whispered that some survivors had fled to a hidden enclave deep in the mangroves. Obasi pressed on, following the neighbor's directions. The dense mangrove forest was a labyrinth of roots and waterways. At one point, he slipped into the water, narrowly avoiding a venomous snake coiled on a branch above. Hours later, he stumbled into the enclave. The sight of Ese, thinner and wearier but alive, brought him to his knees. She turned, disbelief and joy washing over her face. "Obasi," she whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I told you I'd find you," he said, his voice cracking with emotion. They embraced, their love a triumph against the chaos that sought to tear them apart. But their journey was far from over. Together they would navigate the dangers that still loomed, bound by a love stronger than war. Both of them decided to move on, away from the war and sudden attacks. One night they stumbled upon a hidden rebel camp. Rather than flee, Obasi struck a dangerous bargain. He would forge weapons for the rebels in exchange for their protection. Ese, despite her protests, helped treat their wounded. The rebel camp was a powder keg, its fragile order held together by paranoia and fear. Obasi and Ese, once beacons of hope for each other, found themselves walking a dangerous tightrope. Ese had noticed the way the camp commander, a man named Eugene, stared at her. His eyes lingered too long, his false smiles. One evening, as they sat by the dim firelight, Ese whispered her fears to Obasi. "He's watching me," she said. "I don't trust him." Obasi frowned but shrugged. "It's just your imagination, Ese. Stay close to me, and nothing will happen." But Ise's instincts were right. Eugene had been biding his time, waiting for an opportunity to strike. When a plan to betray the camp's location to government forces was uncovered, Eugene saw his chance. He accused Obasi of being a traitor, planting fabricated evidence to seal the lie. "Traitor!" Eugene bellowed before the gathered rebels. "You've betrayed us all." Obasi was dragged from their tent, his protest drowned by the roar of angry voices. Ese cried out, pleading for his life, but Eugene silenced her with a cold glare. Obasi was beaten, interrogated, and thrown into a makeshift cell. Ese tried to visit him, but Eugene blocked her at every turn. "You'd do well to forget about him," Eugene said one evening, his voice low and threatening. "He's as good as dead." With Obasi out of the way, Eugene turned his attention to Ese. He offered her food, protection, and a place of safety, but only if she became his woman. Ese refused, her defiance only fueling Eugene's determination. One fateful night, he forced himself on her. Ese cried silently, her heart shattered, but she stared into his eyes and said, "You may have my body, but you'll never have my mind or my soul." Eugene's cruelty did not go unnoticed. Whispers of dissent rippled through the camp. Some rebels, disgusted by his actions, began plotting against him. Ese saw her chance when a sympathetic guard, a young rebel disillusioned by the war, agreed to help her escape. Late one night, under the cover of darkness, Ese slipped through the camp's defenses. She fled into the wilderness, navigating treacherous terrain with nothing but her will to survive. For days, she trudged through forests and waded through rivers, evading patrols and scavenging for food. Finally, exhausted and battered, she reached her family's village. Her reunion with her parents and siblings was bittersweet. They embraced her tightly, but the weight of her experiences hung heavily in the air. Ese thought she had found safety, but her troubles were far from over. Eugene, furious over her escape, sent rebels to track her down. Meanwhile, news of Obasi's fate reached Ese. He had been transferred to the rebel headquarters in Enugu, where he faced even harsher conditions. One night, Eugene and his men launched a surprise attack on Ise's village. They burnt the village. The villagers had to escape into the forest. A fellow prisoner whispered a devastating news to Obasi. Ese's village had been destroyed by Eugene and his men, but the news was that Ese and her family managed to escape. Obasi was more determined to stay alive and to reconnect with Ese, the love of his life. Miles away, Ese received her own crushing news. Obasi was reported dead in battle. The letter, unsigned and hastily written, arrived in the hands of a soldier passing through her village. She clutched it to her chest, her world crumbling. For months, Ese mourned Obasi, her once bright spirit dulled by grief. Even as the war ended and her village began to rebuild, she remained in mourning. Suitors came and went, their advances met with polite rejection. Her mother grew frustrated, urging her to move on. "Obasi is gone, Ese," her mother said one evening. "Life must go on." But Ese couldn't let go. Not until Moses entered her life. Moses was a trader who arrived in the village with supplies. His easy smile and gentle demeanor reminded Ese so much of Obasi that it startled her. He listened to her stories, respected her grief, and slowly began to fill the void in her heart. Against her better judgment, Ese found herself drawn to Moses. Over time, his kindness melted the walls she had built around herself. They married a year later, their union a small light in the shadow of the war's aftermath. Their marriage was blessed with 2 children, a boy, Namdi, and a girl, Amara. Ese found joy in their laughter and warmth, though a quiet part of her heart still clung to the memory of Obasi. 5 years after the war, on a quiet market day, a man walked into the village. His frame was thinner, his face older, but his eyes burned with the same intensity. It was Obasi. Word of his return spread quickly, reaching Ese as she sat frying Gary. Her hands froze, her heart racing. When she finally saw him standing outside her home, her breath caught. "Obasi," she whispered, tears spilling down her cheeks. He smiled, stepping closer. "Ese, I told you I'd find you." They embraced, the years of pain and separation melting away in an instant. But as Obasi pulled back to look at her, Ese stiffened. Tears streamed down her face, but they were no longer tears of joy. "Ese," he said, his voice filled with concern. "Are you not happy to see me?" Ese's mind raced, her chest tightening. How could she tell him? How could she explain the life she had built in his absence? I thought you were dead," she choked out, her voice trembling. "I nearly was," Obasi said. "I was sentenced to 3 years in prison, but they released me when the war ended. I've spent every day since trying to find you." Ese turned away, clutching her hands together. "Obasi, I waited for you. I mourned you for so long, but life didn't stop." "What are you saying?" Obasi asked, his voice heavy with dread. Ese turned back to him, her tears flowing freely. "I'm married, Obasi. I have 2 children." Obasi staggered back as though struck by a physical blow. His jaw tightened, and he struggled to speak. "Married? Children?" Ese nodded, unable to meet his gaze. "I didn't know you were alive. I thought I was doing what was right." The silence between them was deafening. Obasi clenched his fists, his heart shattered. "I came back for you, Ese. For us." "And I loved you, Obasi," Ese replied, her voice breaking. "I still do, but I have a family now, my children. They need me." Obasi's eyes softened, the weight of her words sinking in. "Do you love him?" Ese hesitated, then nodded. "I do, but it doesn't mean I stopped loving you." The two stood in silence, their past and present colliding in a whirlwind of emotions. Over the following days, Obasi stayed in the village, a shadow of his former self. Ese watched him from afar, her heart torn in 2. Moses, sensing her turmoil, approached her one evening. "If you want to go to him, I won't stop you," Moses said quietly, his voice trembling with suppressed pain. Ese shook her head, tears glistening in her eyes. You've been nothing but good to me, Moses. I can't leave you or our children. Moses' eyes darkened, his jaw tightening. You're lying to me, he said, his voice low but sharp. Ever since he came back to the village, you've changed. You're a shadow of yourself, Ese. Don't think I haven't noticed. Ise's heart ached, her voice trembling as she replied, I won't argue with you, Moses. I'm a human being with emotions. I need time to process all of this. But I'm not stupid. I have a family now, and that's where I belong. Moses took a step closer, his face mere inches from hers. You're saying that to make me happy, but I see the longing in your eyes, Ese. Every time you think no one's looking, I see it. Oh, Moses, stop this, Ese cried, her frustration boiling over. These accusations won't take us anywhere. But Moses wasn't ready to relent. I won't stop until you tell me the truth, he said, his voice rising. Suddenly, Moses turned toward the door, his steps resolute. In fact, he said, I'm going to meet Obasi right now. I'll warn him to stay away from my family. Ise's eyes widened in alarm. She grabbed his arm, pleading, You won't do such a thing, Moses. Please. Try me, Moses shot back, shaking her off. He stormed out of the house, his footsteps pounding against the earth as he made his way to Obasi's temporary shelter on the outskirts of the village. Obasi, Moses bellowed as he approached the small, dimly lit hut. Leave my family alone. Obasi emerged from the shadows, his expression calm but wary. Moses, he said quietly, I have no intention of taking Ese from you. Don't play innocent with me, Moses shouted, his voice cracking with emotion. Ever since you came back, you've been a shadow over my home, over my wife. Obasi stepped closer, his tone firm. I came back for Ese because I didn't know she had moved on. I'm not here to destroy what she has built. But Moses wasn't listening. His emotions erupted, and before anyone could stop him, he swung a fist at Obasi. The punch landed squarely on Obasi's jaw, sending him stumbling back. Obasi, a former soldier, regained his footing quickly. He didn't retaliate immediately, but the pain and years of hardship he'd endured boiled to the surface. When Moses charged again, Obasi blocked him, twisting his arm and forcing him to the ground. Enough! Obasi growled, his voice steady but commanding. This isn't the way. Before the fight could escalate further, a figure emerged from the shadows. Ese. She had followed Moses, terrified of what might happen, but she wasn't alone. Behind her stood a group of villagers drawn by the commotion. Stop this madness, Ese cried, stepping between the two men, her voice trembling with desperation. She looked at Moses, her face etched with pain. Is this what we've come to? Fighting like animals? Moses, still breathing heavily, glared at Obasi with unrelenting fury. You've turned her against me. Admit it. Before anyone could respond, Moses grabbed a thick piece of wood from the ground and lunged at Obasi. Don't! Ese screamed, but it was too late. Obasi didn't defend himself, standing firm as if accepting whatever was to come. The wood connected with a sickening thud against his head. He collapsed like a pack of cards, unconscious before he hit the ground. The commotion drew villagers to the scene. Ese fell to her knees beside Obasi, her hands trembling as she cradled his head. Blood trickled from the wound, staining her dress. Someone help! She screamed, her voice cracking. The villagers quickly rallied, carrying Obasi to a nearby tricycle to rush him to the clinic in the next town. Ese followed, sobbing uncontrollably, her heart torn between fear for Obasi's life and the turmoil in her marriage. As Ese moved to climb into the tricycle, Moses' voice rang out, cold and commanding. If you follow him to that hospital, consider our marriage over. The words hit Ese like a slap. She froze, turning to look at her husband. His face was a mask of anger and pain. "Moses, please," she pleaded. "He has no one else to care for him. I can't leave him like this." Moses' jaw clenched. "I've told you my own. If you walk away now, don't come back." The crowd murmured, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Ese's heart pounded as she stood torn between two worlds, her duty as a wife and her love for a man who had once been her everything. Suddenly, Obasi stirred, his groan cutting through the silence. The tricycle halted and the villagers lowered him to the ground. His eyes fluttered open, weak but conscious. "Ese," he whispered, his voice barely audible. Ese knelt beside him, tears streaming down her face. "I'm here," she said softly, brushing the blood from his forehead. Obasi's gaze shifted to Moses. "Don't blame her," he said, his voice hoarse. "This is my fault. I shouldn't have come back." Moses stepped forward, his expression unreadable. For a moment it seemed as if he might lash out again. Instead he dropped the wood he was still clutching, his shoulders slumping. "This isn't just about you, Obasi," Moses said, his voice heavy. "This is about us, all of us." Before anyone could respond, an elderly villager stepped forward, his voice cutting through the tension. "There's something you all need to know," he said, his tone grave. The man revealed that during the war, Obasi had unknowingly played a part in an incident that led to the death of Moses' brother. A miscommunication during a covert mission had resulted in a raid on Moses' village, leaving countless families, including Moses's, devastated. Moses' face contorted with anger and grief. You're the reason my brother is dead?" he shouted. Obasi's face paled, guilt washing over him. "I didn't know," he said, his voice breaking. "If I could undo it, I would." Ese stood between the two men, her heart breaking all over again. She realized the depth of their shared pain, the war that had scarred them both in different ways. "Moses," she said softly, "we've all suffered because of that war, but holding on to this anger will destroy us all." Moses turned away, his fists clenched. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then, without a word, he walked away, leaving Ese and Obasi behind. Later that night, Moses returned home, his eyes red from tears. "Ese," he said quietly, "I'm sorry. I've been blinded by my own pain, but I can't share you with another man. Not even Obasi." Ese nodded, her own tears flowing freely. "I understand Moses, but he needs care. I can't turn my back on him now." "Then care for him," Moses said, his voice steady but sad. "But when you're done, come back to us, or don't come back at all." Ese cared for Obasi at the clinic, nursing him back to health. As he recovered, they talked about the past, the choices they had made, and the lives they had lived. "I love you, Obasi," Ese said one day. "I always will, but my life is with Moses and our children now." Obasi nodded, his heart heavy but understanding. "You deserve happiness, Ese, and if that's with Moses, then I'll let you go." When Obasi was strong enough, he left the village, promising never to return. Ese went back to Moses, her heart torn but resolute in her choice. Though the scars of their shared past lingered, they found a way to move forward, each carrying a piece of the other in their hearts. War is bad,